A farmer once turned down a fortune for his mule. Then he lost it. And later, his son tried to tame a wild beast and broke his leg. But those two tragedies ended up saving the boy's life from a brutal war. This is proof that absolutely everything has a purpose, and that what looks like a curse at first can, in the end, become a blessing. Many years ago, in a fertile valley surrounded by mountains and crystal-clear rivers, there was a small farming village. And near that village, on a modest little farm, lived Don Elias, a humble man around 45 years old, with a face weathered by the sun and hands hardened by the soil. Don Elias wasn't rich. He had just enough to keep food on the table. But unlike many people in town, he always wore a calm, peaceful smile, as if nothing could truly shake him. People said he was poor, but he believed he was blessed. His family was small. His only son, Mateo, a strong young man full of dreams, and one very special animal who had become part of the family, a black mule with a powerful body and bright living eyes. They called him Moro. Moro wasn't an ordinary mule. There was something in his dark gaze, a strange spark, as if wisdom lived behind his eyes. His black coat shined under the sun, and his majestic presence drew attention without even trying. He was strong as the earth itself, tireless through the longest workdays, yet noble and gentle with anyone who treated him with respect. But what amazed people most wasn't only his strength, it was his intelligence. There was something about Moro that made him different. He seemed to understand Don Elias and Mateo before they even spoke. With a simple hand motion, with one firm look, the mule would obey, as if the three of them shared a secret language no one else could decode. Mateo had grown up by Moro's side since he was a child. He learned to ride on his back, and many quiet afternoons he would lean against Moro's coat, whispering his dreams as if Moro could keep them safe in silence. That's why, for father and son, Moro wasn't just a work animal. He was a companion, a member of the family. To them, Moro had no price. It wasn't about money, labor, or convenience. Moro represented unity, effort, and gratitude. A living reminder that real wealth isn't always counted in coins, but in the kind of company that holds your soul together when life gets heavy. Over time, the mule's reputation spread across the entire region. And one day, a wealthy landowner from another area arrived in town, a rich man who had heard all about Moro. He rode in on a fine horse, wearing elegant clothing that clashed with the simplicity of the farmers. The neighbors immediately began to whisper. Everyone knew a man with that kind of money didn't come by accident. He had only one purpose: to see the famous mule with his own eyes, and to buy him. The moment he climbed down from his horse, he asked a farmer where the owner of that mule lived. The man pointed toward the town square and said, "A couple minutes ago, I saw Don Elias there with the mule. You'll probably still find him." The rich landowner didn't waste a second. He headed straight to the square, and there they were, Don Elias standing beside Moro. The humble farmer was buying a few simple supplies before returning home. The contrast was obvious: the simplicity of the man, and the commanding presence of the mule, who looked like a loyal guardian watching over him. When the wealthy landowner finally saw Moro up close, he couldn't hide his amazement. He had never seen an animal so powerful and so well cared for. "That mule is worth gold," he said, impressed. And the moment he stood face to face with Don Elias, he didn't hold back. Right there, publicly, in front of everyone, he offered Don Elias a huge sum of money to buy Moro. It was so much that Don Elias could have stopped working for years. The whole town went silent. waiting for the answer. But to everyone's shock, Don Elias smiled calmly and said, "Sir, I appreciate your generosity, but this mule is not for sale. Moro is part of our life. I could never trade him for money." The murmurs started immediately. Some villagers said, "This old man is crazy. Turning down that much money for a simple animal?" Others added, "He's a fool. He'll stay poor until the day he dies." But Don Elias, calm as always, simply continued living his life. One early morning, when the roosters had barely begun to sing, Mateo went to the stable to get Moro so they could head out to work, and he discovered Moro was gone. His heart started racing. He called Moro's name again and again, but the mule had disappeared. Mateo ran across the fields, checked the fences, searched the dirt roads. Nothing. The mule's absence filled the air with a heavy silence. Mateo searched the whole farm, all the way to the borders near the neighboring land. He spent the entire day asking questions, checking pastures, even following tracks that vanished into mud and grass. But by nightfall, exhausted and shaken inside, he returned with no answers. With frustration burning in his eyes, Mateo asked his father, "Dad, how can you be so calm? We lost the most valuable thing we had." Don Elias answered in a steady voice, "My son, don't rush your heart. Don't call something good or bad so quickly. Time will show what this loss truly means." Mateo stayed quiet. He didn't understand. The next morning at sunrise, still holding on to hope, father and son went into town, believing someone might have seen the black mule. They asked around the square, the shops, the dusty streets, but every answer was the same. No one had seen him. And then the news spread through the village like fire. And with it came the cruel comments. "See? That's what he gets for not selling him. Now he lost everything. He was probably stolen. What a disaster." Mateo looked down, his eyes wet with helpless anger. The pain of losing Moro burned in his chest. But Don Elias didn't get angry. He didn't respond with rage. He stayed silent for a few seconds. And then, with a voice that was firm but calm, he spoke to everyone. "If God allowed this to happen, it's because there's a purpose we don't understand yet. Don't rush to judge. What looks like a tragedy today may reveal itself as a blessing tomorrow. Who are we to claim we know more than the Creator?" His words surprised many. Some went quiet. Others twisted their faces and mocked him. But on Don Elias's face, there was no doubt, no fear. While the town's laughter tried to stab him with invisible thorns, he remained steady, like a tree that doesn't break no matter how hard the wind blows. "You're a fool, Elias. You lost the only valuable thing in your life, and you're still talking about purpose. What you have is misfortune, nothing more. Look at him. Misery has made him lose his mind, and his son is suffering. You should have sold that mule to the rich man who wanted him. Now you have no animal, and no money." The voices rose, dripping with condescension. Each word meant to humiliate him, to make him feel small. And still, Don Elias refused to be pulled into the tide of contempt. His calm was a powerful silence that spoke louder than their insults. A reminder that real faith isn't built on what you own, but on the strength of your soul. "Life doesn't always reveal its truth right away, my friends," he continued, resting a hand on Mateo's shoulder. "One day, we believe we've lost everything. And the next day, we realize that what we called a loss was actually a gift in disguise." Don't look at life only through what your eyes can see today. Look with patience, because time is the only thing that truly knows how to separate what is good from what is bad. Mateo stared at his father in disbelief. His father spoke with a peace so deep it was impossible not to feel it. And in the middle of his sadness, Mateo began to understand. Maybe his father's calm wasn't indifference. It was faith. A faith not dependent on circumstances, but on the belief that nothing happens without a reason, that everything happens because the eternal Almighty God allows it, whether it looks good or looks bad. That same afternoon, Don Elias and his son started back toward the farm. The sun sank slowly behind the mountains, painting the path in golden tones. With a trembling voice, Mateo broke the silence. "Dad, I admire how calm you stay. How do you do it?" Don Elias looked at him tenderly and replied, "My son, everything in this life has a purpose. Even when it looks bad, many times it ends up for good. You'll see. Have faith. Accept what happens. And above all, be grateful." Hey, you're enjoying this story, right? If you are, write this phrase in the comments. Everything has a purpose. That way, I'll know you connected with the message. And listen to this. 94.8% of the people watching these videos still aren't subscribed. If you're part of that group, I invite you to subscribe right now. It's free, and it helps you keep getting more stories that inspire and transform lives. And remember, at the end of the video, you'll find more stories waiting on your screen. Several days passed in uncertainty, until one morning at dawn, as the sun turned the mountains gold, Mateo witnessed something unbelievable. Moro was running back home, and behind him came other wild mules. Mateo ran, overwhelmed with emotion. "Dad, look, Moro came back, and he didn't just come back, he brought more animals." Hours later, the whole village heard the news. The people came to Don Elias's farm to see the spectacle. The same ones who had criticized Don Elias before now said, "What luck! This man is blessed. His poverty is over." But Don Elias, without pride, without exaggerated excitement, only said, "Maybe the mule went looking for his herd, and now he returned with them. Let's not call it fortune yet, not when we still don't understand what it means." Mateo was overflowing with joy because Moro was back. He hugged him around the neck, stroked his mane, as if reuniting with a lost brother. The other mules stayed at a distance because they were wild, but they didn't leave the farm. Mateo smiled with hope, convinced this was a sign from heaven. But when he glanced at his father, he noticed Don Elias remained steady, not letting emotion take control. For Mateo, it was the return of happiness. For Don Elias, it might have been the beginning of a new test. The next day, Mateo woke up with his heart full of excitement. As soon as the first morning light covered the fields, he ran to the pasture where Moro grazed beside the new wild mules. From the fence, he watched them with hopeful eyes, convinced these animals could bring a new future to their farm. But when he tried to approach, the mules backed away in distrust. They snorted, struck the ground with their hooves, and watched his every movement with suspicion. They didn't accept his voice or his presence. It was as if an invisible wall rose between them and the young man. Mateo felt a wave of frustration, but seeing Moro calm, grazing peacefully, he understood something. Trust isn't earned in a single day. If my father believes everything has a purpose, then I must believe it too, he told himself firmly. And in that moment, he made a decision. He would dedicate his time and strength to taming that distrust, to turning those wild mules into working partners, part of the home, no matter how many hours, days, or months it took. Mateo began training and domesticating the new mules. He spent entire hours in the pasture approaching patiently, speaking softly, studying every reaction, learning how to earn their trust. Days became weeks, and weeks became months of hard effort under sun and rain. Many times, he ended the day exhausted, hands wounded, body drained, but his spirit never broke. Little by little, the animals who once looked at him with fear and suspicion began to accept him, until they no longer saw him as a stranger, but as a companion worthy of respect. But one day, while trying to tame the wildest one, the animal threw him violently. Mateo hit the ground, and his leg snapped. The pain was unbearable, and as if misfortune always attracts poisonous tongues, some villagers passing by saw what happened. They were the same ones who had mocked Don Elias when he lost the mule, and again they murmured cruelly, "See, those mules brought disaster. Now his son is hurt." Mateo clenched his teeth, thick tears sliding down his face. "Father, don't tell me this isn't bad now. Look what happened to me," he said through sobs. Don Elias arrived quietly. He knelt in the dirt and held his son's leg firmly. His gaze didn't tremble, and in a low voice, one that seemed to warm the pain, he replied, "My son, don't call it bad yet. Time has mysterious ways of showing us the truth." And right then, the criticism came like arrows aimed at Don Elias's heart. "And now what, Elias? Where is that purpose you talked about when you lost the mule? Look at your son, broken on the ground. What kind of blessing is this?" Don Elias looked at them without changing. With the calm of someone who doesn't need to defend himself from the world's noise, he spoke, firm, but filled with peace. Purpose isn't always understood in the moment, and pain doesn't mean God is absent. Don't call something a tragedy before it's finished revealing what it truly is. Time will show whether this is loss or a lesson. Don Elias didn't argue with anyone. He tore a strip of rough cloth, made an improvised splint from 2 straight branches, and while Mateo gasped, he carefully immobilized his leg. And he whispered, "Don't curse the pain. Sometimes it's a demanding teacher. If God allowed it, He will also give us strength to walk through it." Mateo stared at him, eyes burning with fear. "But what if I can't work again, Father?" "You will work again, my son. Sometimes God stops us to teach us how to walk in a different way. You don't understand today, but don't rush your judgment. Be grateful for life, even when it hurts. The rest, leave in the hands of the Most High." The wind moved through the pasture like an ancient hand. Far away, the mules watched in silence, and in the middle of the pain, Don Elias's words hung in the air like a promise that needed no proof. The truth of this day was not complete yet. Only 2 weeks after Mateo's accident, the country went to war. The government began recruiting every young man to send them to the battlefield. No one could escape. When the soldiers reached the village, they went farm to farm taking young men. When they arrived at Don Elias's home, they saw Mateo's broken leg, and they couldn't take him. Meanwhile, many other young men were ripped from their families, and sadly, most would never return. Families cried uncontrollably. The village air filled with mourning, like a river of pain with nowhere to flow. Mothers clutched the empty clothes of their sons. Fathers stared at the horizon with lifeless eyes, unable to accept the absence. Sobs mixed with the silence of empty homes, homes that seemed to scream the names of those who never came back. The ones who once mocked Don Elias now looked at him differently. The very army that took their sons couldn't take Mateo because his broken leg kept him home. And that's when they understood what they had once despised. The trial that looked like a curse was actually for good. Through tears, they said with broken voices, "We pointed at him. We laughed at his misfortune. But look now. His son lives, while ours were taken, and we don't even know if they'll return." Their words were true. Everything that happens is permitted by the Creator, even when in the moment it feels unfair. The silence that followed wasn't mockery anymore. It was respect. Many realized that the faith of that humble farmer had seen farther than their rushed judgments, and that what looked like loss was actually protection. Don Elias, eyes calm and voice steady, looked at Mateo and said, "Do you see, my son? What looked like a tragedy ended up becoming salvation. Losing Moro hurt, but he returned with more. Breaking your leg hurt, but it spared you from war." That's life. We never truly know what something means until time reveals it. Mateo, tears gathered in his eyes, answered with a knot in his throat. "Father, now I understand. I cursed the day that mule threw me and I broke my leg. I thought my life was over. But if it weren't for that pain, I wouldn't be here with you today. My friends were taken, and many will never come back." Don Elias placed a hand on his son's shoulder and continued tenderly, yet with a strength that pierced the soul. "My son, that's why I told you not to call something bad before it finishes revealing what it truly is. The Creator writes with lines we don't understand at first. He sees farther than our eyes and knows more than our hearts can handle. Everything He permits with a purpose." Mateo lowered his head, moved, and said quietly, "Forgive me, Father. I doubted your words. I doubted your faith. But now I see you were right. God never abandoned us. He was guiding us through a path I didn't understand." Don Elias hugged him tightly and with held-back tears whispered in his ear, "Never forget this, Mateo. Life isn't measured by what we gain or what we lose, but by the trust we place in the Creator. What hurts today may save you tomorrow. What feels like a blessing today may test you tomorrow. So be grateful at all times, because everything has a purpose." In that moment, the silence of the field became sacred. The wind moved through the branches as if confirming those eternal words. And inside Mateo's heart, a new faith was born. A faith no longer dependent on what he could see, but on what he had learned to trust. I'm truly glad you made it to the end of this video. If this story left you with a lesson, subscribe so you don't miss more stories that change lives. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.